Okay, well, hello, let's get started. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be, and welcome everyone to the Conversational Collective. This is an inclusive, open meetup dedicated to exploring, learning, and creating conversational technology. I'm your host, Olivera Bay, and I'm going to be sharing with you this awesome event today. And just a little bit about me. I've spent the larger portion of the last 2 decades in marketing as a graphic designer and art director, and then switched into UX design and conversational design as of 2020. I worked at Bell and then at Master of Code. And recently I went to Cerence, where I'm a voice user interface designer on automotive and mobility AI. And from here, we're going to talk about our panel discussion. We have something really exciting today, and that's conversation design roles and processes with a lot of cool folks. And before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. And first off, a big thank you to all the Convo Collective organizers. This meetup is a labor of love, completely volunteer-based. So the people on the screen deserve a shout out. Bishma, Olivera, Matt, Lauren, Clint, Meg, Sarah, Ifioma, Hannaford, and Brittany, thank you for putting this on each month. And thanks to our sponsor, Reusable. If you're not familiar, Reusable is a conversation design platform that helps teams design, test, and refine their conversation designs. Their website is reusable.io if you're interested in checking out their product. And if you or your company might be interested in becoming a sponsor, please do reach out on Twitter DM. Our handle is @ConvoCollective. And then from here, if this may be your first time joining and you're not a member yet, please make sure you sign up to officially join the Conversational Collective. We'll also repost this chat, and this will be on the lookout for that. And when you sign up on our community forum, you'll get access to our Slack and LinkedIn groups. Super helpful if you're looking for a new job in the space, you're hiring, or just want to learn what other members are reading and learning about in conversational AI. And filling out the community forum will automatically give you access to the Convo Collective newsletter, where you'll get non-spammy emails reminding you about all of our events and links to other trending resources and news, hand curated by lovely organizers. You can also follow us on Eventbrite, where we post all of our events. And alrighty, folks, we're almost done with the shameless plugging. So if you haven't already done, please introduce yourself in the Zoom chat. During this entire event, you'll be on mute while we have our panel discussion. So please do type out your questions for us and post them in the chat, and make sure it's directed to everyone, not a DM. And we'll get to it as soon as possible. And finally, our agenda today, we have about 10-minute intro, and then we're going to have the panel discussion starting at 8:10 a.m. CST. And we have some really interesting pre-selected questions and topics from those of you who left questions during the registration. And let's get started by everyone taking a quick minute to introduce themselves. Amanda, would you like to start?
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Amanda Stevens. I'm the Director of Conversation Design at Master of Code Global, and have been with the company for over 4 years.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for joining us. And Aditya.
Hey, thanks. Hey, hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm from where I'm at. So you can call me Adi. So I'm a unit product manager here at Quantiphi. I've been in our designing conversations, been in the whole conversation design space for over 4 years now.
Great. Thanks for coming. And Chiara.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. And of course, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Chiara Martino. I'm Italian, and I live and work in Italy. I'm conversation designer and knowledge engineer, and I work at Assist Digital, which is a consultancy company in Italy.
Thanks very much for joining us, Chiara. And then from here, I would love to hear if you could give us a synopsis about your journey into conversation design, and then highlight any challenges and highlights during this journey.
Sure, I can go. So I kind of fell into conversation design accidentally, or I leaned into it a little bit. At the time, I was a key account manager at Master of Code, managing my client accounts, being responsible for their bot's performance and, reporting, and started looking at, I was also always looking at transcript data, and started seeing how that link between how effective something was designed and how it directly affected conversion rates, containment, engagement, retention, all those fun things. And started making tweaks and seeing how effective those tweaks were, and didn't know what conversation design was. Started doing more research, and it was around the time 2019 when more and more people were starting to talk about it, and we realized we needed to do something. We needed to have a process methodology, because you can design the most complex conversational solution in the world, but if it's poorly designed, people are never going to get to that part of it, because they're just going to fall out of the flow. So changed my role and did heavy research into, what are the big companies doing, married with what have we learned from our own best practices, and put together a methodology that we still use today. In terms of challenges, thinking about when, I was mainly working on messenger bots to now, there's so many different channels, Apple Messages for Business, or even, Google Messages for Business. It's always a challenge when a new channel or new technology comes out. We have to very quickly figure out, okay, what are the best practices for this channel? What types of structured content can we use? And just never make assumptions that from channel to channel, things work very similarly. So it's always, when something new comes out, it's always a race to figure out, what is the best experience in this channel.
That's great. Thank you. And Chiara, would you like to go next?
Sure. Well, my journey to conversation design actually started at university. I was studying languages, and I chose a course in computational linguistics. So that was the first moment in which I realized that languages and technology, and particular artificial intelligence, were actually connected. So soon after graduation, I looked for a job in that direction, something that could help me put together languages and AI. And I found this startup that was looking for a conversation designer. Of course, I had no idea what a conversation designer was. There was no content at all at the moment. And I also had very little experience with chatbots or voice bots. But I decided to join this startup, and I immediately realized that it was the right job for me. And yeah, the biggest challenge at the beginning was learning so much outside my area of expertise, outside languages and linguistics. So I had to learn about AI, about coding, about UX and design. So it was very challenging, but also very satisfying. And as I said, there was no content about conversation design specifically. So I kind of felt like we were building the best practices. And well, an highlight on the other side would be probably the moment in which I reached out to join the founder of Women in Voice, because I reached out to her to know if there was already a chapter in Italy. She told me that there wasn't, but that other two people were willing to create it together. So I reached out with two other people, and we built the Italian chapter together. That was the beginning of another adventure, let's say, and also the moment in which I started to connect, with an international community, and I basically found out that there were so many people out there who actually worked in this field already and were willing to share ideas and points of views.
Sounds great. Yeah, I've noticed your involvement with Women Voice, which is awesome. And finally, Aditya, would you like to talk about your journey as well?
Hey, yeah, sure. So mine's a very interesting one. So I'm an electronic engineer by studies, and my complete college was in electronics engineering. And so I started my career off as a business analyst. And the first project that we ended up getting into was conversational AI. And at that time, about 4 years back, everything was FAQs, everything was a very sequential aspects to conversation design. So I got into the whole design phase, I think way ahead when it was still maturing, right? So it was a very interesting jump. And from there on, I think I developed a great interest towards it, working with customers, understanding their, brand and creating, design language. And after a year, I wanted to not just create them for customers, but also sell the personas to them. So I got into technical solutioning and started building customized demos for customers, be across verticals, be it retail, hospitality, and so on. And finally, I thought, okay, fine, I need to get into the product space. And now I'm a product manager here at Quantiphi. And we are now trying to build cool products that allows the community as well as outside to create, simple conversation designs, as well as, a huge repository of templates and so on, right? So that's where we are building towards. So it's a pretty interesting jump. So I think the pretty much highlight is the career transition the past 3 years, from a designer to pre-sales to a product management within the span of 3 years. And the main challenges is the advancement of technology and the whole conversation design space itself, from where we have FAQ to now a completely contextual driven conversations where every company now is looking for brand voice, right? And there is no like one rule that fits all with respect to conversation design. I think that's the most interesting challenge to conquer.
Oh, yes, that's fascinating. And let's talk about a little bit, I'm going to hand this over to you, Amanda, when it comes to doing the design work itself. How does it get done? Talk to us a little bit about the processes, roles, tools, day-to-day workflow.
Sure. So we have quite an involved process. With us, it always starts with data. Data has to inform the design, our decisions, and we really need to understand what is the pain point? What are we actually solving here? So we start with, if it's a new project, really spending a lot of time with the client, getting their side of things, what are their business problems? What are their goals? And then we turn it over to looking at data from whoever the end users are. So what are their problems? And it's such an important step, because business can say, let's do a bot that does X. But when you actually look at the end user data, they're talking about very different things, or they could be, right? So we want to make sure that matches up, because you don't want to launch a solution that doesn't address a major pain point of those end users. So we start with data. And then once we collate the data, we prioritize use cases. Just because customers do have a pain point doesn't mean you should automatically add it to a bot. Maybe you just need to update your FAQ page, right? So we want to make sure whatever we prioritize is use case that is faster, better, more efficient, more valuable than current state, because channel switching is very expensive. So if folks are going to one place to do a task, you want them to go to a bot instead, it's got to be worth their while. So prioritization is extremely important. We also additionally validate that with building out a customer journey map, again, to make sure that we really understand how many steps is it today? What are all the different ways customers are doing this today? How many steps is that? Okay, my design needs to be shorter or faster, or again, more valuable for the user. We also develop a bot persona to make sure it's in line with the brand. It has that tone of voice. And then we start creating and of course with approvals every step of the way. And after that, we get into design. So designing the flows, the dialogues, building out our, what our NLP matrix is going to look like. So for us, a matrix is just a document that houses all the different pieces of training data and intents and bot responses. And then all we do is much testing as we can, sometimes prototyping, and then launch, and then it's passed off to bot tuning, and then we do it all over again.
That's a very comprehensive process. Yeah, thank you for taking us through that. Would you like to continue and add to that, Chiara?
Yeah, well, I more or less agree with what Amanda said. Of course, the workflow changes if you're building a new project, a new bot from scratch, or if you're creating a new conversational flow to an existing project. but certainly data are absolutely most important thing, because sometimes stakeholders have some expectations, but when you actually read or listen to what users actually ask, what users actually need, you will find out that maybe they need actually different things, or they just express their needs in different ways. So maybe the goal that the bot, the specific flow should have is slightly different. And yeah, after that, it's all starts the design itself. So you have to design, the personality and all the elements that can work for the whole flows, and then the specific flows. And absolutely, testing is also a very, very important part. If you can't test with users themselves, at least it's important to, ask suggestions and try to test it with other colleagues, maybe, who can have different points of views, even if they're not users of the specific project. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a very structured way to go about it. Thank you, Kara. And Aditya, would you like to speak to some of the processes, rules, tools, and workflow?
Right. So typically in my my organization, right? So we have about 3 to 4 different roles or responsibilities that's taken up by in the realm of conversation design. So we have a business analyst who's typically a lead conversation designer, right? So he or she is involved in getting the requirements from the customer, doing workshops. So one of the most important process in our conversation design whole element is the whole workshopping phase. So we do a lot of workshopping with the customers and try to get their aspect of their vision, and also provide them feedback on, okay, this is how the tone of voice could be, and align on that before we proceed. So that's where the requirement gathering and all that happens, and we use tools like Miro board to collaborate across with stakeholders, where we have those sticky notes and kind of create a framework around that. So that's where we do. And then we have the dialogue designers. We pass it on this requirements to a dialogue designer who would now understand the tone of voice and the persona and start building these integrated conversations, either using a flowcharting tool, mind maps first, before they actually design it on a platform, like be it Dialogflow or be it any other platform of choice, right? So this is typically the process. One massive change in the industry that we've been seeing right now is the inflow of contextual conversations, right? So we have now introducing a new set of processes where we want to kind of capture all the contextual conversations at the start itself, before rather than going in a traditional intent-based approach. So that is a new kind of framework that we're trying to implement, and I think the industry is going towards that direction.
Right on, right on. So building on that, Aditya, I know that there have been some questions or topics that you wanted to elaborate on, such as brand voice and what role does it play in conversation design? Can you tell us a little bit about the brand voice and how do you go about creating a framework for that?
Yeah, so the most interesting thing is, the main misconception is that, that usually people have is, brand voice is a very core marketing concept, or it's typically for customer facing scenarios and all that, and not from an enterprise perspective. But that's completely, from what we've been seeing, that's completely, wrong. So a brand voice is one of the most important element when it comes to designing a persona and tone of voice, with respect to your conversation design process, especially it's like the first aspect, right? Now, brand voice is essentially, it's just the way you talk to your customers, and defined by, the customer or the brand style of communication. And it's actually targeted to their target audience, right? It's how they portray the language they use on their websites. And it's the small things that you can notice on their websites. Like, for example, the About Us page, the career page kind of gives the company's culture. And these are important elements to understand the brand's voice and how they want to portray this to both, be it catering to their employees, or be it catering to customers, right? And this is one thing where we feel that understanding a customer's brand voice is a first step towards creating a compelling persona and tone of voice of any sort of virtual assistant, be it on a chat experience or a telephony scenario. And how how do we go about creating a big framework, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, there is no like one right framework to go about this. Typically in the whole conversation design process, building most of the companies or customers that you would work with essentially would have a brand voice established, and some of them would still be trying to drive a different message through their voice assistants, right? So the first thing, the first point is to kind of understand what's their main vision, and where this comes into the whole task of things. So it comes as a parallel task when you start mapping out the use cases, right? So at the moment you start mapping out the use cases with the customer, the brand voice building and understanding the brand voices comes as a parallel task right before you start designing dialogues and start designing conversation or even mockups, right? So this is the point where I feel like, the whole tone of voice and persona element of brand voice comes into picture. And I'll just give you an example, right? So for example, let's say Uber, right? Uber's voice is very bold, direct, and passionate. If you use the app, you kind of see their tone. Even it could be an app interface or it could be even their web interface, right? It's very bold, direct, and passionate. That's their brand as well. So that kind of suits their whole global, that suits their whole global image. That they focus on efficiency and safety, right? Same thing goes for Shopify and other elements who clearly call out their, their brand vision, right? So now what I want to do is talk about a very simple framework that how you can easily identify your customer's brand voice, or at least augment them, right? To create a very, very compelling persona and tone of voice. The first thing that you would have to do is first pre-read, right? So before you go to the customer for any sort of thing, pre-read, go to their website and go on to understand the customer's vertical and domain. So one of the advantages that we conversation designers have is we get to understand verticals that we never knew, to be a part of. For example, like let's say you're working with a CPG or FMCG customer, right? So you kind of understand what supply chain is, how do they do things, right? Where is their problem statement? Or you work with a provider or hospital care, you understand how to improve patient satisfaction, right? So you kind of get into their feet and become an SME down the line. So that's the first step, is to understand the customer's vertical and domain. And next is take a look at their vision, mission statement, and their about us pages. That's the first thing where you'll get majority of the information about the customer. So once you have an image in the mind of the customer and of the brand or of the customer, you prepare your perception of the brand, and then you go to the customer. Then workshop it, right? I mean, that's how we do it. So we just workshop it. We try to set up a call with the right stakeholders. And majority of the time, we miss out the most important stakeholders when identifying personas and tone of voice. So these stakeholders include marketing managers, right? Comms specialists, communication specialists. These are people that are the most crucial folks and stakeholders when it comes to designing a persona and tone of voice of a bot, right? If it's an external facing bot, if it's an internal facing conversational agent, it could be an HR manager, right? Who understands the company policy really well. So these are those important stakeholders that you need to talk to them, understand the brand's vision and so on, and create like a mood board or create like a framework of, a board of your choice. It could be Miro, concept board, or anything. Collaborate with them and, create a framework around what should be the tone, what should be the gender of the bot, what should be the persona, and drive that completely, right? So yeah, so that's the pretty much the whole crux of it. So once you do that, you'll be able to get the whole the use cases and what they want to achieve. The next is the customer base, which customers they want to target, what is the demographic of their customers, so the language can be tuned appropriately. And now once you collect all that data, you can prepare different variations of persona and tone of voice, different permutations and combinations, and then present them to the customer, right? So that's like a very detailed framework that we kind of utilize internally to come up with a very, very compelling brand voice. And typically the brand voice is like a guide or a master guide for an organization for any sort of agents that they're going to implement down the line. So yeah, so this is something that that's a topic that I wanted to kind of touch base on, and
Yes, thank you, Aditya. That sounds like a very complete framework, and I love the way you tied in the voice brand into like the next steps in terms of the processes and the roles of workshopping. That was very, very insightful. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and talk about what are the processes that need to happen before designers starts mapping out a flowchart or dialogue. And if you could elaborate a little bit more about the customer journey mapping before the design begins, that would be great.
Sure. So yeah, like I said, it all starts with data, and then we have to make sure we categorize it, put it to potential use cases, and then we prioritize it. So prioritization includes, are customers talking about this today? Are they comfortable talking about this? Just because they're comfortable speaking about it with a human, we really have to think, is putting a conversational solution in front of them, are they going to feel as compelled to, ask the same questions? And then, does a user have to visit multiple websites today to get this done? Because one great thing about a chatbot, for example, is it ties all those systems together, so it's all in one spot for them. They don't have to go to different places. Or are they engaging with different GUIs or other different apps, different systems? So if they're doing that today, that allows us to see, okay, there's an opportunity for more efficiency here by, again, bringing all of those systems into one window, one spot, or engaging with one assistant. So once we have a bit of a score system. So if we have a high score and we see there's value in prioritizing this, then we want to validate that score by actually mapping it out. So that's why customer journey is so important, because just because you can kind of tick boxes, okay, yes, they're talking about it today, yes, they go to multiple websites. We actually, if we're going to map out a conversational journey, let's make sure we really understand current state. And by figuring out how many steps a customer takes today, then it really causes us to think as designers, okay, this is currently 2 steps, how do I make it 1? Or it's currently 7 steps, how do we reduce it? Are there APIs that we can leverage to make it more contextual, or again, make it that much faster for a user? So if you're not mapping at customer journeys today, make sure you start, because unfortunately, there's bots out there that, like I mentioned, channel switching is expensive, and it's just as long of a journey, or it takes just as long as current state. So there's no efficiency there. So it might take 5 steps in the bot, and then it also takes 5 steps on my mobile app. So what am I doing here, right? Another example that I like to bring up is working with a banking client. They said, yeah, we want the user to go to the website, it's in the corner, they log in, and then we ask them what they want, and then maybe they'll say, oh, I want to check my balance, and then the bot will show them their balance. But I can also open my banking app on my phone, Face ID, and immediately see all my balances of my account. Are we solving a problem here? We really need to rethink about that. And again, that would have come up once we've prioritized it, and also would have validated our assumptions by creating that user journey map and realizing there's 2 steps to do this today. Putting it in a bot might take longer. Is this what we want our top use case to be? So really, really critical in understanding current state to inform future state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really like how methodical this prioritization use case system is, and also the emphasis on the customer journey mapping. It can be overstated because we have to have a good understanding of where the customer is and how many steps they're taking to achieve a goal in order to do a better job with that. So thank you for that, Amanda.
Yeah, sure.
And Chiara, could you tell us a little bit about some of the role names? We're going to switch a little bit now. The focus is going to be about roles. And could you elaborate a little bit what you've come up across in terms of role names and the lack of standardization? And if you could also talk about the difference between working at a product startup versus working in a big consultancy.
Sure. It's actually a topic I really like to talk about, because I've experienced myself, this lack of standardization and how confusing it can be. In my professional experience in conversational AI. I've always been a conversation designer, but actually the two main experiences I had as a conversation designer were quite different. The first one was in a startup, and well, basically conversation designers had to do everything. So from, of course, user research and a little of project management to the actual design, copywriting, NLU training, conversation analysis, and even sales and little marketing. While when I transitioned into a bigger company, the conversation designer role was much more narrow, much more focused on UX. So the main tasks are UX research, UX testing, and user testing, and of course the design and copywriting of the conversational flows. And that's why actually I have two roles right now. I'm both conversation designer and knowledge engineer, because in the company where I work now, knowledge engineers deal with all the NLU training part, conversation analysis, and implementation. So this lack of standardization, I think, is not a bad thing per se, because it might be interesting and challenging to have to do with a lot of different tasks, but it's quite confusing when you are looking for another job and you really don't get what job description actually match with your expertise or with what you really like to do. And it's also confusing for employers who probably, when writing job description, don't really understand, don't really know what they're looking for, what kind of professional, what kind of skills they're looking for, because they don't know what conversation designers are. And there are two points of views actually for that, because it's not only a matter of having the same role that means something different in different companies, but is also the other way around. I mean, the same role can be addressed with different names. Like there are conversation designer, but also conversational designers, conversational UX designers, the UX, the UI designers, and often the differences are blurred, not so straightforward between these namings. And yeah, this is certainly one of the biggest differences I found in working in a startup and in a bigger company. But another one was the fact that in the startup, we built our own products. So I basically was using always the same tools, which were developed internally. So we had our own developers who could change things, create new features, and it was quite easier, to always use the same things. And I also could ask the developer, please, I need this new feature by tomorrow. Can you make it? While of course, working in a consultancy company, you have to be much more flexible and learn to use many tools, and also work with different methodologies, depending on the client or the project you work on. And of course, you can't ask the tools developers to create that particular new feature because you need it immediately, but it's all very, you must be very flexible for that.
So that's a really great overview. And I think as conversation designers and hiring managers, we all have to do a better job understanding what are some of the intricacies between roles and how we describe them and how we select them. So thank you for that, Chiara. And is there anything else we want to chat about before we jump into some attendee questions? I mean, there's a lot more we could talk about, but I'm just looking at the time.
How much time do you have? I actually just want to add to what Aditya said about workshopping. I think it's so critical, and it's such a collaborative way to work with clients and stakeholders and really get them excited about, what you're building and what you're designing, especially if it's new to them. Instead of, sending them an email, it's, hey, can you fill out this questionnaire about your brand, tone of voice? Get them in a workshop, get them, I just find it's so much more effective. And especially using questions that make them think. Like when we're determining, what a bot persona is, what that tone of voice is for a brand, we'll ask things like, if this bot was a human, what department would they work in? Would they be in sales? Would they be in customer service? And I find it really starts getting stakeholders thinking, and they get really into it. And we'll ask things like, okay, what would the bot be passionate about? What would their job description be like? So really appreciate using workshops to get stakeholders excited, invested, and quite responsive, giving you that information and data that you need to really build out a tone of voice that is a true extension of their brand.
No, this is a really important point. Also, the part about collaborating is really important with clients. When that can happen, then there's a sense of like, coming together and building a strong foundation for the project, especially if it's their first chatbot and they're new to that. So it's so important to have that collaborative practice together. So that's a really, really good segue into some of our questions. So let's take it away. How about we start with roles and processes, organizational structure, things like this. Chiara, I'm going to turn it over to you to answer some of the questions. I'm just going to read them out. This is from Yun Min Oh. She asks, who are the stakeholders and partners you work the most closely with, and how do you collaborate with them?
Well, the most important stakeholders in my experience are product managers, product owners, and project managers. They are the people you work more closely with, at least in some of the steps of the workflow. And but also, of course, developers. If you don't have a platform and you can't implement yourself, the conversational flows, you have to hand the design over to developers, of course. So it's always very important to be able to collaborate, talk the same language and understand each other. It's not always easy, but it's very important to. And yeah, of course, it also depends on the task you have and on what other professionals you need to have around. Because if you if you do just the flow design, but you're not also the copywriter, of course, you must work very closely together with copywriters too, together with QA testers and maybe researchers and other user tester if you're not doing all the workflow yourself. So yeah, these are, I think, the main partners, stakeholders you get in contact with.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And can you talk to us a little bit about the difference between a conversation designer in terms of a senior or lead conversation designer and what those two different roles, so maybe entry or intermediate to senior? And this question is from Ben Hazel.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the more experience you have, the more you can foresee problems before they actually arise. So, maybe in workshop or when you are with stakeholders in general, you understand that they're expecting something that maybe is not feasible or that will make problems arise. So we can immediately suggest some deviations from their projects or just, start thinking about how to solve that particular problem. And these in terms of actual, skills you have, but also I think that a lead or experienced conversation designer should, be able to set the right atmosphere, the right communication atmosphere between all people who work at the same project. And the more you work with people, the more you work at this kind of project, the more you are able to know how to communicate with different professionals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll just add to that in terms of a senior role, also being focused on the strategy in being able to give advice to the client in terms of the strategy. I think that's an additional point to what you just said. Thank you for that. We have a question from the audience currently right now. It's I'll have you answer this last question, Chiara, and then we're going to switch to Amanda next. what advice would you give to the person who's trying to build a micro SaaS, so software as a service, in the domain of conversational AI?
Well, that's a great question. I think it depends on the product you're actually trying to build. I mean, I don't really get what micro SaaS means in this context. But yeah, again, the major advice I would give anyway is to do a lot of research at the beginning, because if you have to set, a goal, a focus for your product, the most important part is the initial research, in which you actually collect requirements, needs and expectations, and then working on that, you can actually reach, achievable goals.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Amanda, I have a couple of questions for you. And this first question is from Brian Smith. And he asks, what's the best way to approach a conversation design use case when you need data to inform the experience? How do you go about it?
Sure. So, trick question. You always need data to inform an experience. So if you don't have it, you need to go find it. And I mean, of course, ask the customer. And if they don't have, maybe they don't have live agents today, maybe they don't have transcripts. Of course, that type of data is gold. Conversation designers love actual agent transcripts. If you're creating a chatbot, for example, then text transcripts are great. If you're creating a voice assistant, then don't just look at text, right? We have to, because people type differently than how they talk. Also, worked with a client and they're like, oh, we'll just give you what people type into our search bar on our website. I'm like, no. I mean, it's good for some context, but if you think about everyone on the call, think about how you search versus how you chat versus how you talk, right? So you want to make sure you get some data that is in the same channel of what you're trying to build. So if it's voice, see if there's audio files and phone transcripts you can listen to. If they don't have that, I've got on Twitter. What are people asking the brand? How are they talking to the brand? What are they tweeting about? Or, Facebook, even any kind of channel where they're currently interacting with the brand today, I need to understand what that is. So we can uncover what are the problems that this solution could solve. And make sure that we're not just solving business problems, we're solving user problems, right? So always use data to inform your decision. Otherwise, you can go in blind. And what can happen is you design a beautiful experience, wonderful use case, but it's just not what customers need. It's not what customers are asking for. And stakeholders will just blame the technology. They'll just blame the bot and say, the bot's not working, so maybe we shouldn't invest in it anymore. And really, the problem, there's nothing wrong with the bot. It was just the use case wasn't prioritized and data wasn't used to inform decisions. And you created something that customers didn't want or didn't need or didn't, isn't solving their problems, and their problems still remain today. So absolutely always use data. If it's not given to you, you ask for it. And if there's nothing available, then you have to create your own. So get user groups together, like actual users together, send out surveys, if there's live agents, talk to them, talk to as many people as you can who interact with end users today to get their feedback of what they see problems are, where there's opportunities to address pain points. And again, like if you're able to get end users together and talk to them and get feedback from them to really inform your design decisions.
Okay, right on. Great answer. Thank you. One more question. Let's go with Amog Agastya, and he asks, what's your opinion about the use of large transformer models like GPT-3 in conversational assistants?
Sure. So I haven't worked with GPT-3, but I'm very excited about it. However, I don't think we are at a place where we can just have an unsupervised assistant, just, okay, here you go, like have fun, go nuts. We still need to be monitoring our conversational solutions. Are they working well? Are they being accurate? Are they firing the right experience, triggering the right intents? Are customers asking something they're not able to answer? Do we have to provide additional training? So I'm excited about it. I think it is the future. And doing a little bit of research ahead of time, it sounds like there's been some. It's quite impressive, but I think today, we still need to be very involved in looking at how our bots are performing, and making sure that they're being tuned appropriately, and that we're very much involved in what they're saying and how they're saying it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And let's go with one more question. Noel Jamin asks, how does one create a reusable conversation design flow?
Oh yeah, this is a good one. So look, I'm all for efficiencies. I think we have to be really mindful if we're just templatizing everything, because again, different brands have different tone of voices. They have different end users with different problems. However, it doesn't mean you can't create reusable patterns. So patterns such as, really like fallback flows, for example, that have, you have your first fail and then you have your second fail. Those can absolutely be reused, or even best practices around welcome messages and how they, how the system introduces itself. So kind of how our team creates patterns and kind of templatizes them is we will create something, and if it performs really well, then we share it with the team, and then everyone starts using it. And once we see success around that particular pattern or that microflow, if you will, then we put it into, we have a lucid chart with all of our best practices, or our best, our well-performing patterns, and lean on those because they've been tested, tried, and they perform well. So I encourage you to the person who asked this question, not to templatize everything, but create those patterns that you can keep in your back pocket and leverage across all different types of solutions, but they're not so templatized that you're using the same dialogue, the same tone of voice, because that has to be different depending on the client that you are working on. So if that makes sense. Yeah,
that does make sense. Having some best practices, but at the same time, reevaluating client by client.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, thank you, Amanda. And Aditya, I'm going to pass over the next few questions for you. And the first question will be, I'm going to lump two questions together. One is from Sophie Henry and the other one's from Jason Berry. She asks, what's your biggest piece of advice for an entry-level designer? And he asks, how do you quickly ramp up with no UX or PM experience?
Yeah, I think that's a very apt question, because I started off, completely scratch in an entry-level space. So I think the biggest advice is there is no one, one best technique that fits any, conversation design thing, right? So there is no like, okay, fine, this is the right way to do it, this is wrong. Every project or every kind of an experience is unique, and to kind of one of the biggest thing to kind of ramp up your expertise or your thing in the realm of conversation design is to kind of network in the sense, build out, join a lot of these communities within LinkedIn, join multiple conversation design forums, listen to podcasts. There are a lot of podcasts happening right now, especially in the past 2 years, right? Especially during this whole COVID phase, we've been seeing a lot of this ramp up in the in the conversation design communities. Every city is opening up a chapter, right? So be a part of that, join that, organize events, right? Organize events with them. You could maybe do it with these folks itself. You could do that, take up events and attend. There are also a lot of influencers online. Follow the major influencers like let's say Hillary Black, Hans is there, Jason, Keynes. So they have multiple of these people. Just follow them and kind of understand where the technology is going towards, where the whole realm of conversation design is going towards, right? Now that is with respect to understanding the whole design space. Now with the technology space, I know at an entry level, it's little overwhelming, but it's always good to get started to understand the basics of, analytics, right? So like what Amanda's been saying all this while, analytics is a core important piece, and to understand how to measure that, how to, retrieve KPIs and how to kind of measure where your conversations need improvement. I think that's one technical skill set that you need to you can easily pick up on.
No, that's a really, really good comprehension of what we need to do as entry-level conversation designers. And there's so many resources out there, and I really like your point about networking. And now I'm going to jump into a completely different question. And this is from the audience right now. Aditya, will it be possible to leverage Google's new Lambda 2 for conversational interfaces, and what benefits it will offer?
I think that's a very interesting question because we work very closely with with Google. So Lambda, I mean, when the whole Lambda, one kind of like released, and we've been all seeing Dialogflow CX and how the whole NLP has kind of improved and kind of introduced the whole contextual mechanism. But with Lambda 2, I think that with full-fledged conversational interfaces, it's still not there yet. You need to at this point, I would say the best kind of use cases for Lambda 2 would be, I know it's pretty much Lambda 2 is like a dialogue-based application, right? It's meant for dialogue where it's trained on millions and millions of topics, and it can generate natural conversations. Yes, it's good, but again, it's you need to kind of monitor them, right? You need to have a very supervised aspect to the models running. So I would say things like kiosks, car assistants, and so on. Like Google Assistant skills, Alexa skills. Those would be a very good starting point where you can start trying to utilize Lambda 2. But on full-fledged conversational assistants, no, not yet recommended, but maybe let's say small talk, right? Maybe you want to add a flavor to your small talk. Maybe that's a place where you can try to utilize Lambda 2 and create these fun, conversations, and that the bot can generatively create on the fly rather than you training boring small talk again and again, right? So I think this is where I see at the moment where where the industry is right now, where we can utilize Lambda 2.
Okay, right on. Just keep in mind for all of the time, we've got 5 minutes left. Thank you for that answer, Aditya. And Christina Margie, she asks, what UX courses do you recommend?
Oh, so there are a lot of courses. I mean, there's so many courses online. Again, it kind of depends on what you're kind of aiming towards, right? So within the whole conversation design space, you have the whole UX aspect of it. You have script writing, copywriting, and then you have the linguistics angle and the AI training angle, right? So you have different pillars within the whole conversation design space. So first is find your calling, right? So I would say, to start off with, there's so many resources online. I think one is something that I really liked is a Notion repository put by Ben. So I think that is something that a lot of us in the community are utilizing that. So that's a one Notion repository, but I can drop that link below. So that's like a one Notion repository where you have different conversation design links, resources to get you started off with. And then once you find your calling, right? I mean, what do you want to kind of specialize on, right? Is it the AI training piece or is it the copywriting piece? Then you can ramp up and, maybe take up a certification course. And there's so many people that offer that, be it Reusable, right? That provides some great certification courses, or, Conversation Design Institute and so on. So I would say, yeah, you can go like a step-by-step manner to kind of, figure out your courses. So I can drop that link below. And that's a link that me and also all my colleagues kind of like got extremely, use that. It's one repository that we kind of keep reusing it.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thanks for reminding us about Ben's resource. That's a really great point. We'd definitely appreciate if you have the link to that, and if you can find it before the end of the chat, that would be so helpful, especially for those new conversation designers starting out. Let me see. There's one question I'm going to pass over to Chiara. Chiara, any beginner-friendly voice bot workflow you would recommend for someone starting a project, and also how long the conversation should be when designing?
Well, when we talk about voice bot, the first thing to take into consideration is that there is, of course, an extra layer of complexity. So you have to be careful because that each prompt you write will solicit a specific answer in users, but his answer might be transcribed badly. So you have to do a lot of tests to figure out what's the best prompt, not only in terms of usability, you know, and that, but of course in terms of how they will be transcribed. And another very important thing is also TTS. So when you write prompts, again, you have to test them in your TTS tool to see how they are spoken, yeah, to prevent any problems. And also keep prompts very short, because you know the cognitive load is higher when you are writing prompts for voice bots. So conversations should be quite short, as short as possible, I would say. But of course, it depends on what you're asking users. If you have to collect data, they cannot be too short. You have to ask them. So yeah, that would be my advice.
No, that's great. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. Thanks very much for that. We have 1 more minute, and let's go talk about from Pratik. How does one go about making a chatbot self-learn and update itself? Chiara.
So we lost the connection.
Okay, I'll just repeat. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so question from Pratik. How does one go about making a chatbot self-learn and update itself?
Well, it's a great question. You know, there's a lot of talking about synthetic data. So something that could be used, it could be created by algorithms to tune the same algorithms. But of course, it's something that is in the beginning, so I haven't used them yet, and yeah, I don't have experience with that.
Okay, fair enough. And one last question, I'm going to wrap it up. What kinds of skills and abilities do companies want, especially from bilingual or multilingual conversation designers?
Well, the more languages you know, the better. I mean, I have worked at projects, well, mostly in Italian actually, but I had experiences in which you had to translate prompts in other languages because you had to create a multilingual bot. And of course, if you are, if the prompts are written by the same person, I mean, the same person writes them both in one language and in another or in others, it is much easier because, you know, a translator might not have the same perspective, the same knowledge of how, again, each word you use in prompts will solicit different answers. So yeah, it is better, of course.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Chiara, Amanda, and Aditya. I really appreciate you all coming out, as well as all the attendees and participants. Thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate your time and looking forward to the next event. Have a great evening, morning, day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.